Hello, Sunshine, and welcome back to another episode of heartablazepodcast. This episode has been a long time waiting, along with another episode. I've just been putting it off forever. Usually I don't have trouble with most of my episodes, and I kind of go straight for it pretty soon within 1 or 2 days of shooting. I can kind of get down to editing. But I think because this one's a bit more formal kind of event and statistical, I kind of really just wanted to make sure I get it right. And sometimes the more you think about certain things, the more you kind of end up going crazy about it. With the preparation, you just kind of end up putting it off more. So yeah, same thing, as the channel kind of always promotes, leap of faith, don't wait too long, just go for it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. It's always good like that. I mean, although obviously do some more planning. But anyway, early July, I went and I think it was early June, I booked for early July because all of them were booked out essentially, but there was a tour for MSIc. If you don't know what that is, that's the tour of Uniting Medically Supervised Injecting Center, and it's located in Darlinghurst or King's Cross area in CBD Sydney. Now, I'm going to start off by kind of talking about what they say who should attend, and then go into my experiences and talk about a little bit about some of the main statistics that was kind of covered, and also kind of what the supervision center is essentially really focused on doing, and why is it so important to have such a facility to exist, especially for obviously I'm a gay person, so the queer community obviously it's become quite a bit of a culture to be essentially what they say chemsex, and it is a very big thing, and it has it would definitely have implications, especially on younger generations. Indigenous population also has a pretty heavy use for that, and we'll go into medically why that's an important presence in terms of a lot of people not getting sort of healthcare, or kind of scared of going for healthcare, and how this place also kind of has an important presence because of that. And if I'm kind of stuttering with my words, it's because I've kind of woken up from one of those naps where you wake up and you kind of question what year it is. I've had one of those ones. And I do want to say for this episode, I've been putting off a little bit because I wasn't sure exactly, I think I was worried about sort of delivering very statistical information. Sometimes it gets me a bit not worked up, but nervous, and I overthink it, and then I kind of end up putting it off. It was a very exciting experience for me, but at the same time, it was one of the episodes that I have found a little bit challenging to kind of record for, if I'm being entirely honest, which is really cool, and I love being transparent about this stuff. But I did realize, and I think this is why this episode is super cool and super important, it kind of was a good reminder that I don't have to be the center of focus of a podcast, especially when it comes to educational episodes, where it's an experience that's fully new to me, in that sense that, I'm not a medically trained personnel about any sort. It's not my area at all. So, and this is the whole reason why we go to a tour and get someone who is an expert in the area to deliver information to us. So I will let, luckily I have found out the gentleman's name. His name's Will. Luckily, the gentleman who gave us a tour, Will, thank you so much for giving us all these incredible information and historical facts about the facility, the history of King's Cross, and also drug use in Sydney. It's always great to have more context. Knowledge is power, and it helps us make more informed decisions. And I believe Will mentioned as well that he did not have a lot of sleep, and he was, still doing the tour for us, which is a free tour, so it's very, very incredibly privileged. We are incredibly privileged to be able to do this, essentially. So thank you very much for doing that for us, and thank you for being so nice and, trying so hard. And he did mention at one point that he was noticed I was filming. I was a bit nervous whether he was doing well enough. You did amazing. Thank you so much.
So if you can cast your mind back to the 1990s, for some of you weren't even around then, I understand that. So Sydney at the time, and indeed Australia, there was a glut of very cheap, high quality heroin around, and And King's Cross had the somewhat notorious reputation of being the red light district of Sydney, and there was a huge population of people here. There were sex on premises venues, there were sex workers, there were people bustling on the streets. There was a very busy place. There were people paying for sex workers on the street, and also in a number of the brothels around here. And there was a very a big public drug market and public drug scene. In fact, almost everywhere you looked in King's Cross, in the alleys and laneways, you would see evidence of people dealing and using drugs, including injecting. In fact, it was significant. It was prolific. And you'd also see discarded syringe litter all around the place. Now, at that time, not only was there an open drug market, there was also a lot of police corruption. That's not controversial to say anymore, because there was the Woodrow Commission into police corruption, and actually that identified that there was a lot of issues in terms of that. And in terms of the recommendation for an MSIc to be created actually came from the recommendation of the Woodrow Commission. So at that time, there was a lot of public drug use, but there was also a lot of overdoses. And in fact, the rate of overdose in Sydney King's Cross was so high it actually exceeded the national road toll, which is seen as a barometer for all sorts of things. And there was a lot of vociferous tabloid media attention to the drug issue of the area. Oops. Hello for MSIc.
Yes.
Yeah, come in for the tour.
Yes.
Yeah, welcome as well. Just sign in at the desk over there. I've just started my rank. So there was a lot of overdoses, and there was a lot of overdose deaths, and there was a lot of ambulance call-outs to this area. And there was a lot of tabloid media attention, and there was actually on Kellett Street, which is at our back door, there was actually a photograph on the Herald and someone else. And so there was a photograph of a 14-year-old boy being injected by an adult. And this was a fairly common thing, and there was a lot of negative media attention to it. So there was a lot of discussions and defined editorials. So the government of the day, which happened to be the Carr Labor government, said, okay, if we're re-elected, we're going to hold a national drug summit. And sure enough, they were re-elected and they held a drug summit. Now, this was a really important occasion, and probably the first time in Australia's history, there was a collection of doctors and clinicians and people with lived experience and police and people from civil society, all that actually came together and probably for the first time ever dispassionately discussed the issues around drug use and how to address it. Now, from that, there was 172 recommendations. Now, most of the recommendations were not very controversial. They were things like more counselling, more places for opioid agonist treatment. But there was one controversial recommendation, and that was to set up a supervised injecting facility in smack bang in King's Cross as a harm reduction service to stop people dying from drug overdose. Now, I say it was controversial then, but actually they did a field study through Europe, and actually there were a number at that time, 90 injecting facilities already in the non-English speaking world in Europe. So the first one opened in Bern in Switzerland in 1985, and it was to address the problem of a nearby park where lots of people were injecting and dying from drug overdose. So as a trial, they set up one in Switzerland, and that was very successful. And so they spread to Germany and Spain and so on. So and these were operating very successfully. So they decided to set up as a clinical trial, and we opened in May 2001 and have been going strong for 25 years. That met all of its objectives. They extended it for 18 months, and then we met our objectives again, then extended it to 18 months because it was politically expedient. And then in 2011, it was made permanent by a joint act of parliament. And so we've been going for 25 years. So, okay. So, as I said, there's now, there were 90 injecting centres around the world. So this was the first one in the English-speaking world. And so that was quite big because all of the evidence base was actually published in another language. So that was very controversial at the time in terms of the media, which was interesting. The tabloid media jammed the situation, and then when they came out with a pragmatic response to actually stop people dying from drug overdose by having an injecting centre, then the tabloid media damned us for that as well. So you can't win either way, right? And so the aims of this service are simply to prevent death and injury from drug overdose, to reduce the spread of bloodborne viruses such as hepatitis C, HIV, and Hep B, but also as to act as a gateway for what are often a very marginalised, vulnerable population to the health and treatment sector. Objectives, they extended it for 18 months. And then we met our objectives again, then extended it to 18 months because it was politically expedient. And then in 2011, it was made permanent by a joint act of parliament. And so we've been going for 25 years. So, as I said, there's now, there were 90 injecting centres around the world. So this was the first one in the English-speaking world. And so that was quite big because all of the evidence base was actually published in another language. So that was very controversial at the time in terms of the media, which was interesting. The tabloid media jammed the situation, and then when they came out with a pragmatic response to actually stop people dying from drug overdose by having an injecting centre, then the tabloid media damned us for that as well. So you can't win either way, right? And so the aims of this service are simply to prevent death and injury from drug overdose, to reduce the spread of bloodborne viruses such as hepatitis C, HIV, and Hep B, but also as to act as a gateway for what are often a very marginalised, vulnerable population to the health and treatment sector. And Aboriginality and colonialisation and trauma and a whole host of other issues actually injecting drugs to manage that trauma, and they're living in the local area. So it was very much seen as a community response, a local solution to a local problem. And so some of them we agree with and some of them we don't. And the license requirement says that you have to be over 18 to use the service. Now, there's an argument that if you've already been injecting for a while and you're 16, it would make sense to come here, but that's set by the government. You can come here, but you can't have your first injection. You have to have evidence that you've injected previously, and we gather that through history collection. And that's because we acknowledge that injecting drug use is potentially the most harmful way of administering a drug. So we don't want to introduce new people to injecting. And actually, the evidence suggests when somebody first starts coming here, they've been injecting for approximately 13 years. So these are people with entrenched dependencies and often entrenched harms associated with their drug use. And you can't be accompanied by a child, which is an obvious one, and of course we're all mandatory reporters. And you can't be intoxicated. And we manage that subjectively in our reception area. So if somebody comes in and they're drug affected, that's fine. But it's a bit like at a bar. If you come in and you're intoxicated, if you're smashed, then we're not allowed to allow you in. And that's both for the safety of other consumers in the service, staff, and so on. And we don't just turn people away, we provide support and care, give them naloxone, link them in to health services where we can. So apart from that, it's a low barrier service. And what we associated with their drug use. So often when they come here, they've had really awful experiences accessing healthcare. So they come to us not because we're a health service, although we are, but because actually we support people and allow people to be safe without judgment, and we meet people where they're at. So in order to allow drugs to be injected legally here, they made an amendment to that part of the legislation that makes drugs illegal, and it's called the Drug Misuse and Trafficking Act. And so they made an amendment to that act. So when you cross over the threshold here, it's legal to be in possession of a prohibited drug for personal use, and it's legal to self-administer that drug by injection. Both of those are normally crimes. So it's then legal What's not legal is any sort of drug dealing, any sort of drug supply, or any sort of drug trafficking. So, and it's a small amount of drugs. So it's about keeping people safe who are drug users, who are experiencing harms of drug use, but it's not about defending or protecting drug dealing. And the normal laws of the land apply at the front door, at the back door, and out in the community. And so how people get here with their drugs, well, we have relationships with partner services like health services, but we also have a relationship with police. In fact, the police are one of our responsible authorities. So we are run by Uniting, and I'll explain how that works in a moment, which is the social services branch of the Uniting Church, although most of us are atheists. And we're run by the Commissioner of Police, and we're run by the Secretary of Health, and there are 3 responsible authorities. So police can come in here at any time, and they can review our data, but actually we have support by police because we're seen as one part of the solution to reducing drug-related harm. So we are an example of a harm reduction method. Supply reduction is policing, and of course demand reduction are things like opioid agonist treatment places, which is also a harm reduction approach, or education.
And I want to mention, like, one of the things that I didn't really know much about is oxytocin. That's one of the drugs. There's another drug that's also pretty popular but often doesn't get covered, which is ketamine. It's a kind of like a horse tranquilizer. It is kind of getting into the scene, but I believe it is actually more snorted, as in inhaled through your nose more than anything. There was also another drug that was, I believe, mentioned that was quite interesting. They did have like some kind of like one of those devices that was listed on the table in the footage that was basically a filter to filter out something that apparently often turns out to become something like a waxy cover inside your lungs, which is really not great. So what it does is essentially at least filters out that, so it kind of helps with that issue, and kind of gives you something more pure to work with. So obviously, again, harm reduction is the goal, if you're going to be doing it anyway.
To be taken orally, like MS-Contin and OxyContin. So the idea behind harm reduction is to keep people safe and alive.
Talking about a little bit about the cubicles, because I didn't really get too much of a shot of it, but essentially they are just sort of like, not like actual secure, like fenced off cubicles. They are sort of just like little between barriers on the actual table, just to kind of separate the different sections. And then you just have a few of those metal, steel, obviously more clean and sanitary stations. And then you've got like the sort of like the little toolkits, and you obviously have the bar with the whole clinical bar, clinical medical supplies behind. And also the emergency equipment and such to help with people if they do undergo the process of an overdose.
We don't have a duty of care or a requirement under law to otherwise do our due diligence. So if I can see somebody making up baggies or selling or something like that, I have required. If they've got like a pound that's clearly, obviously too much, I have to do something about that. You get ear burn from people who use methadone. They come in here and it's very intense in this area particularly, and that's the area. Also, in terms of drug treatment, the picture's a little bit more complex. We don't have this wonderful gold standard treatment of opioid agonist treatments like methadone, buprenorphine, and so on. One person who's been trying to get in treatment for ages hasn't been very successful. He's about a month into his treatment here, so it's going well. So we're hoping to start more people on LAIB here.
So the treatment he has mentioned just here, I will list down over here, because this is a very interesting thing. I did not know about this. Injection type of medical treatments are actually not exactly brand new. They have been happening for a little while. For example, if you're HIV positive, then you would know that HIV is usually oral treatment where you take a medication, a pill, every single day, once per day. and it stabilizes, then you kind of like don't have to check in as often anymore as your viral load and everything kind of stabilizes, and you become completely, as we call it, undetectable, which means that it goes dormant in your body. You don't ever progress to AIDS, and you cannot pass it on or be transmittable. So you're essentially as safe as like people negative on PrEP, or more so even safer, because you know that you have it, but you cannot pass it on for sure. Whereas, negative, it's actually kind of up in the air. And that's a very, very interesting part of the stigma that people don't quite realize. And that is something I do want to cover in a future episode. So I do want to bring that up. But basically, medical injections have kind of become one of the options for HIV. It has been a while now, and I remember them offering it to me at one point during a consultation and like a checkup. And I said, honestly, because it's so new, I was not really keen to jump on it yet. I thought, different types of people, different types of genetics, different types of body types. I don't know. So many things can factor into it. And I just don't fully trust it yet. And so I said, if it ain't broke, I don't want to, like change it. So I'm just going to stick with that for a while and see how that goes on, because I believe that one is, I think you inject it and you kind of come back every once in a month or so, and you don't really have to you then don't have to do like a daily thing, so which kind of gives you a lot more freedom and a little less stress. And some people have like pill fatigue, so that would really help with that. So I do see its place in the scheme of the treatment. And so with this one, it's very similar in the sense that it is a slow release of a treatment, and it helps with managing your reliance on the substance. So that's really cool. Very, very cool thing, new to learn. And there's a list of some options of if you want to kind of look into it and how to get into the scheme. One of the services that is provided is also kind of checking your drugs. It's always good to kind of know how pure it is, and also just to kind of know exactly what's in there, because sometimes it's not really what it is set up to be. Now, one of the main things that was interesting that he was showing us was they obviously have a device that they can also use to like check people, and that can be used to check hypoxic people who are going, hypoxics. And I want to mention, read out the definition for what it means. So hypoxics means your body tissues do not have enough oxygen to work the right way. It causes signs like shortness of breath, confusion, and a fast heartbeat. This is a serious medical emergency that needs fast help. You can learn more from the Cleveland Clinic, blah, blah, blah. And over here, I wrote down in my notes. So that's when like your oxygen level is anything less than 95% on their device. And this is the part where we come in to talk about Nyxoid. You can have a look. This is what was dispersed from. I got it from basically the sexual health clinic that I go to. If you're in Sydney, the one is a really good one is Kirkton Road. Sometimes does require a wait, but it is completely free. And you can do your sexual health check there. And you can also have go through them to get some consultations or like counselors and such. It's good. And this is basically it's also known as naloxone. Hopefully I'm not butchering the pronunciation. And it's a spray that basically helps with opioid overdosing. And you can tell. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the symptoms that you'll be looking for if someone is. So they'll have obviously like pinpoint pupils, obstructed breathing, snoring, trouble awaking, and blue lips. These are some of the symptoms. And I'm just going to open this one up. This one's a brand new one, so I just wanted to show you what you'd be getting. And there's also obviously the instructions on the front, which is great. They did also mention that community pharmacies should be doing it for free now. And they also do additional brief training. So that's always great. So check that. a lot of instructions actually on the manual essentially, which is good because I think a lot of people with medical items or like first aid kind of I guess like medical, what would you call it, medicine, I guess, like with these kind of stuff, a lot of people generally just don't know what to do. And also if the adrenaline of a situation or something happening, people can be freaking out, especially if you're both like a user or something like that and you're trying to help the other person. But the quick version on the back of these is basically call an ambulance on 000 in Australia, 111 in New Zealand. And obviously this is a really important reminder. The spray is actually used to kind of buy you time, like any first aid when you're doing CPR and such, helping a person, putting them in a recovery position. That's all to buy time. You do have to call a medical team, an ambulance essentially, or get them to the hospital as soon as possible. That's buying you time. So I think usually it's always best to call an ambulance because you don't necessarily know whether you should be moving a person around as much or transporting them, especially with other kind of injuries. It's always good advice to know that moving them or overcrowding them is generally all like a bad idea. It says to lay patient down, tilt their head back, as you can see. Spray into one nostril, lay to recovery position, which is that one. And this one does say check for signs of overdose. Shout their name, gently shake their shoulders, talk loudly into their ear, rub their breastbone, the sternum, pinch their ear or the bed of their fingernail, clear the mouth and nose of any blockages, check airways and breathing. Is the chest moving? Can you hear breathing sounds? Can you feel their breath on your cheek? Let's see. No response to touch or loud sounds. Slow, uneven breathing or no breathing, snoring, gasping or gulping. Blue or purple fingernails or lips. Small constricted pinpoint pupils and severe sleepiness. If an overdose is suspected, naloxone nasal spray should be given. I believe I was already down here. There's a 3 to 5 minutes come on, and I believe there are actually two versions of this. One is a spray, and the other one I think it might be a oral one. If you really need to, you can actually do a second spray after that. And the reason why I got these is because I do want to try to start carrying some of these kind of stuff, because you never know what might happen, and you may be able to save someone's lives one day.
Effective as intramuscular naloxone. There's some evidence that the rate of onset is very slower, but we also know that the length of effect is longer. IM naloxone lasts longer than IM naloxone.
But yeah, so overall, I think it's a really good tour to do, especially if you have friends. I know it's challenging if you end up knowing someone that has gone into addiction. I knew I lost a lot of friendships because of my own poor decisions when I started using. And, it is very difficult to live with someone or keep a friendship or support someone who is deep into it. But a lot of times friends do want to stick around and want to help you. And one of the things that is very challenging equally to mental health is you often don't know how to kind of approach the conversation. You need some kind of education or degree of knowledge to be able to navigate this process of how can I help you? What kind of things do you need? It's a thing that's very interesting because when we talk about stigma, for example, with drug use, it's one of those things just like HIV, gay people, all those kind of things that have a very strong media presence, but it's media, we're talking about more like pop culture, like Hollywood and stuff. It's very one-dimensional. People don't realize people use this because everyone is trying to generally heal from something. It's a poor choice and poor route to do it, but it's trying to fulfill something or heal something and deal with some kind of trauma, and they just don't know better or don't know how to deal with it, or some people don't realize it, and some people do simply enjoy it, but the addiction has become to a point where they just don't really know how to handle it as well. There's a lot of reasons, and it's never the same for each person, and it's good to know that fundamentally deep down everyone's a human and everyone deserves a basic care and understanding and a chance. And I think that would be a good place to leave off this episode. I've rambled on enough and stumbled around, but we kind of got there. And hopefully this episode is really helpful for you and very interesting for you. It was very, very cool for me to be able to go through this experience, and very, very informative. and that's the whole point of experiencing these newer kind of experiences and searching out for them to do them on the channel. And I'm very, very grateful. And again, I want to thank the referral coordinator and trained nurse and tour guide for the facility, Will. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry it took so long to get around to this episode. One, there was a lot of things scheduled, lined up, but this one also was slightly put off. But you know, so I also want to mention, I do want to mention that this is a lot of recording from like the session, but a lot of it was also cut out, which were also pretty good information. But I did want to leave some of the things out to kind of cover in person or like talk about in shorts, but also kind of like try to encourage people to actually go there and get a feel for the place yourself. I feel like it's a very different environment when you're thrown into like a area of, you know, you might have someone that you love in the future or someone you know who might end up getting into drug abuse or something like that. Same with mental health. You never expect to like it be you or someone that you know, but sometimes it does happen and the statistics are high. So you never know. And I feel like it's very important for you to experience that kind of like, at least that medical facility in person. You know, get a feel for like all the little cubicles, like the feeling of like what people do and what becomes a normality for these people. It is very, very scary when you think about it. Like when I think about it, like what kind of stuff have become a normality, you know, for example, syringes and all those kind of things, you know, drawing blood and all that kind of stuff was very, very much a medical thing. But it is obviously very different when you become a drug user. So things like that, it's wild, you know. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much again for, you know, tuning into the channel and supporting this very, very new project. And I know it's very, very different. And I'm so happy that, you know, not only to get Sam Tompkins' support on the channel for doing all the things that I'm doing and, you know, kind of creating something new. And of course, like all the lovely friends I have made along the way and all the old subscribers turned into new subscribers, close friends, all the musicians, all the lovely, lovely people that have given the chance to taken a leap of faith with my project, put their kindness into the world and continue to share their stories. Yeah, it's what HeartaBLAZE is all about. So again, thank you so much for that. And yeah, more cool things to come in season 4. I'll see you in the next episode. Bam. Keep up the sunshine.